Hi, everybody. This is Christy from the Bayville Free Library, accompanied by um, Lydia from the Glen Cove Public Library. Welcome to the Genealogy Collective. Our partnership brings together six North Shore libraries: Bayville, Glen Cove, Gold Coast, Locust Valley, Manhasset, and Oyster Bay. Together, we host monthly genealogy programs. Did I lose you guys? There we are. Monthly genealogy programs. Tonight's program, Cultural Survivals from the Great Jewish Migration to New York City, 1881 to 1924, is proudly sponsored by the Bayville Free Library. Our featured presenter is Michael Chaplin. Michael is an adventurer and a naturalist with an MA in anthropology. He is widely traveled and writes for various publications. A member of the Jewish Genealogical Society of Long Island, his main genealogy interest is tracing his family's lifeways in New York City back into the 19th century. He is also the author of the popular New York City treasure hunting book, The Urban Treasure Hunter. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Michael.
Okay, I guess I get the show now. Thank you all for coming. This adventure started when I had a job transfer that put me like 5 minutes away from the New York City Municipal Archives. And from there, I read I read Arthur Kurzweil's book From Generation to Generation, and it said, um, if you're interested in Jewish genealogy, you should go into the municipal archives. And this was really the first time I'd ever been around there. And I thought it'd be a good place to explore, which I did. And I learned a lot. Um, as was mentioned, my background is in anthropology, and that's how I came up with the title Cultural Survivals from the Great Jewish Migration. A cultural survival is something that is a remains from cultural practices from the past, um, that people still do, that people have artifacts, they have rituals, or they're structures that you would see that the people once used for these rituals, but they're no longer being used for that. They've been repurposed. And a good example of that would be the pyramids in Egypt. So this basically is my genealogical research that led me into discovering the pyramids of the Great Jewish Migration that existed in New York City, in the Lower East Side, and in Harlem, where my family lived at different addresses. So first, we're going to start with life in the Alta Heim, which means the old home in terms of how people affectionately referred to where they used to live in Europe. Once they got to the United States, New York City, they'd say in the Alta Heim, in the old home, I did this, I did that, whatever. So we're going to start with photos of the Alta Heim. Uh, this is the area that's encompassed. This is the Pale of Settlement in Russia, and it was created by Catherine the Great in 1791. And the yellow part in the beginning is the city of Minsk, where uh, my mother, she came here when she was 10 years old, and other members of my family came from Minsk or around Minsk. They lived in a village called Smilovich. And so all around, now it's called Belarus. So now all around you have like Lithuania, different places but that's Eastern Europe. And Catherine the Great declared that Jews are only allowed to live in the Pale. Here's an example of a shtetl, how a shtetl looked. This is Kazimierz. It's a Polish shtetl, and it's been very well studied. There's a book out on it that has photos of it, and it gives a good representation of shtetl life. one of the most important parts of shtetl life was market day. And this is when all the peasant villages that would be surrounding the shtetl would send, their carts and horses with the produce to sell, to trade. And it was a big day, market day. And sometimes people would even rent a house from people a few days ahead of time just to make sure they got everything in. And it was an interesting place to be. Um, Next, we see people standing around. These are non-Jewish people over here, and this person over here is a Jewish person. This may be connected with him, I don't know. But this is, how people looked at that time. Picture in the 1870s, 1880s. This is a market day scene. And here in the shtetl, they had a synagogue, but it was made out of wood. And this is where the people would go to worship and have their rituals. And once they got to New York, boy, they really outdid themselves with building synagogues. I'll tell you, in the early 1920s, they had over 500 synagogues in New York City in the Lower East Side, which is amazing. Here's more people sitting around. They're obviously, to me, people who have a business, and they have like these different drinking containers. So I think they're selling refreshments, and they don't look Jewish. They look like part of the non-Jewish population. Here is an example of the shtetl was made up of the Jews and the non-Jews. And mishpacha means family in Yiddish. And so here you have the Jewish family, and here you have the Polish family. But one thing that you'll notice, I think, is that a lot of kids, a lot of kids. This non-Jewish family, there's a priest here, and the kids sort of seem to wear like uniforms with once they get to a certain age. And here's like the grandparents over here, at least the grandfather. I can't see the grandmother, but she's there to the right. These people were well dressed. They seemed like they were not suffering from poverty or whatever. And these are the klezmer musicians that would come to help you celebrate your happy events, a wedding, a bar mitzvah, or a family, something that was going on good in your family. They'd bring in musicians. Here's the shoemaker. Now, this is a very important point to make, because one of the first things that people did when they got to New York City, if they could afford it, was to change their shoes, because the shoes identified them right away. It became known as greenhorn shoes. If you came in wearing the shoes that the shoester or the shoemaker would make. And there's a good picture later on of people who did just that. And this was his trade. This is how he served the community. And here we have the cheder, or the Hebrew school in the shtetl. And that's the melamed, or the teacher. I remember my years in Hebrew school was torture. And after I was done with that, I never went back. But these kids are learning different, things that, were important to know. And here, this is a wonderful photo. These are my great-grandparents. When my grandmother came here, who I never knew, I never met her, she came here in 1922. She either brought this a photo with her, these are her parents, or these, my grandparents, Sur and Zalman Sutin, they mailed it to her. Heritage gives a way of dating photos, and they dated in the early 20s. If you notice, the name is Sutin. If you've ever heard of the famous artist of the School of Paris, Chaim Soutine, um, Chaim Soutine was their son. He was my grandmother's brother. And he was thrown out of the village because being a painter, uh, it goes without saying that a Jew does not paint. That's what the rabbis kept telling him. And so he sort of like got ticked off by that, and he drew a picture of the rabbi in the coffin. And they threw him out of the village. But first, the rabbi's sons beat him up, and then they had to come to terms and for giving him damages. But the deal was, we'll give you this much money, but you get out. And he left. He wound up in France with Modigliani. But these are my great grandparents, and I'm glad I really have this picture. It's terrific. Um, so the Jews started leaving Eastern Europe um, in the early 1880s. That happened when Tsar uh, Alexander was assassinated in 1880, and his son, Tsar Nicholas, who took over in 1881, he blamed the Jews for the assassination. And that created a lot of violence and other things. Like, for example, here I say there's something called the May Laws. And this states that Jews are forbidden to newly settle outside of towns and boroughs. Issuing mortgages and deeds are forbidden to Jews. Jews are forbidden powers of attorney to dispose of real property. And Jews are forbidden to transact business on Christian holy days, including Sunday. What happened to market day? It's gone. So anyway, there was a lot of pressure, plus the violence that was happening to the Jewish people. My mother told me a story that there was a time when there were people ransacking Smilovich, or Cossacks, or whatever they were, and her mother, Mirka, you'll see a picture later, she had three young girls, and what she did, she painted each of them up with red dots all over their faces, their arms, or whatever. And when the Cossacks broke into their house, they saw that, they ran out. They thought they had some disease or something. And what's interesting about that, aside from happening in my family, I gave this presentation at at a JCC out in Suffolk, and I told that story, and the woman in the audience said the same thing happened in her family. They had the same story. So that was obviously a way that women protected their female children. They would paint them up with red dots when the Cossacks were coming. Okay, so this is the New York Daily Forward, or Vorwärts, and it describes the Kishinev pogrom in 1903, and the headline says over 300 killed, and that was typical of that time. This was a very weighty pogrom. A lot of people died. And this is a photo that I took out of a National Geographic. The pogrom orphans were arriving at Ellis Island in 1906. And there were Jewish charity groups that were working to get them out. And these are orphans. And once they got to New York, I guess there were places for them to stay and everything like that. You had the girls, wearing the dresses, and the young boys wearing the shorts or whatever. But it was a tough time. And here are what are known as the Romanian Fusgeiers, or footgoers. They, in the late 1800s, 70,000 of them walked out of Romania. They walked out, or they walked to the Danube River, and they took a boat to the end, and then they walked to the German ports, Bremen, or the Belgian port of Antwerp, Hamburg in Germany. It's amazing that, and what they did, because I read more about them, is that they weren't just like two people. They may have been, two people here and there, but there were groups of people, and they would give performances. A lot of them were musicians. They would give performances in the villages that they would pass through along the way, and they would receive food or whatever else, and it helped their journey. But 70,000 of them left. And here are the Jews leaving Hamburg in 1909. Somehow they got to Hamburg. A lot of them had to sneak out of Russia. Some took trains. I really don't know. But if you could think of your own ancestors standing there, if if that's your family history, they came out. Any way they can get out, and they're being lined up here, being asked questions, and they got on a boat and they left to New York City. This is a ship ticket. This is from Libau to New York. Libau is a Baltic port. It's the port that my paternal grandmother came from. That's where she was living, up there. And now a ship's cart was an important thing. After 1910, a lot of the people in New York City were sending these ship tickets to their relatives in Russia to get out. And there's this wonderful book that I read. I recommend it. It's called Jews Without Money. And this person, he grew up in the Lower East Side, and he talked about his relatives in Russia always writing to the family that his own family, when are you going to send the ship's card? Or when are you going to send the ship's card geld, which is ship ticket money? Very interesting. And here are two ads for the Red Star line. And they were both leaving from Antwerp to America. Now, what's significant about this ship, it's the Lapland, and that ship brought both of my grandfathers to New York, one in 1908 and one in 1913. And the only other thing that they have in common, they both died in 1923, which is strange. But this is the ship that brought them to America, and they they were probably approached by different the shipping companies saw this great migration taking place, and they sent their representatives to all the different villages, and somehow they got them to Antwerp. I don't know how, but I give them credit for doing it. Great. And this is what a passport looked like. This is what a Polish passport, how it was spelled. And this gentleman was on his way from Polska, Polonaise. And if you had a ship ticket, you had to have a passport. And now the people that came from Eastern Europe, they didn't come at first or second class. Some did, but most of them came steerage, which is like third class. And this is a very well-known picture of a ship, the Patricia, in 1906. It came from Hamburg on the Hamburg line. And this is how crowded it was. Now, one of the interesting points about this is that a ship ticket would cost around $30, $25 to get you to New York City. And it would cost the shipping company between 40 and 60 cents a day to feed you or whatever, keep you alive. And so you could see, and it took around 8 days, 10 days to get to New York. So the whole ticket would cost, they would spend $6 on the passenger if they spent $30, and the rest was profit. And they would get 2,000 people on a ship. And the worst days to come were in the winter, because you couldn't go up to the top of the ship because everything, it would be icy winds and snow, whatever. And these people were very brave, but they did it. They did it. And a lot of them were older folks. Um, Now, the U.S. Immigration Commission gave out a report in 1911 and said the open deck space reserved for the steerage passengers is situated in the worst part of the ship, subject to the most violent motion, to the dirt from the stacks and the odors from the hold and galleys. Down below, the ventilation is always inadequate, and the air soon becomes foul with the unattended vomit of the seasick, the odors of not too clean bodies, the reek of food, and the awful stench of the nearby toilet rooms. All of these conditions are aggravated by the crowding. It is a marvel that human flesh can endure it. They did it. It's amazing. And this is where they were heading for, Ellis Island, New York City. I took this picture from the Battery, and the ships didn't pull in at Ellis Island. They pulled in at Hoboken, New Jersey, and the passengers came up to be processed by ferries, uh, depending on the number of their on the passenger list. So you would get, like, 40 people on a ferry and go up to Ellis Island, and then one after the other of ferries. And Ellis Island processed between 3,000 and 4,000 people a day. Um, they had one day in 1907 where they processed 16,000 people a day for one day. That was the highest amount. And I hope everybody here who has a background where their family came through Ellis Island goes out there and sees what it's like. It's a very interesting museum type experience. Okay, so then the history of Jewish population growth in New York City. 23 arrived first in 1654. These people were they had an interesting story. They were living in Brazil, and the Dutch had control, but the Portuguese took over and told all non-Catholics that they had to leave. So these 23 Jewish, they were Sephardic Jewish people. They put them on ships, and they were captured by pirates. And the pirates let them off somewhere in the Caribbean, probably in the Dutch Antilles, like Aruba or Curacao, wherever. But a British ship passing through picked them up and took them to New York. So they were the first Jews to arrive in New York City. It wasn't New York, it was New Amsterdam. And Peter Stuyvesant, the governor with the wooden leg, he didn't want anybody in here. He didn't want to let anybody in, but they had connections with the Dutch East Indies Company, and they said, let them in. So later on, you'll see that by 1800, there were 400 Jews. By 1880, there were 85,000. A lot of those were German Jews that started coming in the 1840s. And then what we're talking about here, from 1881 through 1924, 1.5 million Jews came to New York City. In total, during this whole time, 2.5 million Jews left Europe. 500,000 went to different places. They went to Argentina, they went to South Africa. 2 million came to New York, but 1.5 million came to New York City. Here's the first synagogue, Jewish synagogue in New York City. It was built in 1730. It's called Shearith Israel, Remnant of Israel. I don't know if this is really how it looked, but this is how they portray it. So, and the next synagogue that was built in 1825, and that was an Ashkenazi synagogue. And in 1840, there was a Reform synagogue that was built. Previous to the Ashkenazi synagogue being built, all the Jews in New York City that wanted to go to synagogue went to this synagogue. Couldn't be that it's just too small. But anyway, and this is how the public was reacting to all these people coming to New York. It wasn't just New York, Jewish people. It was Italians. It was like people from all over the world that were coming in. And the headline for the magazine, the World Magazine, from 1906 says 12 new Americans a minute. And although they do highlight a Jewish person up front, that they were coming in like crazy. Um, between 1892 and 1924, 19 million people came into the United States. And Ellis Island between 1892 and 1954, 12 million people were processed. So these are the new arrivals on Ellis Island. They're waiting to be processed. That takes around 6 hours. And they're just, waiting their time. They've persevered the transoceanic trip, and now they're waiting online just to be processed. Now they'll be taking a health exam. They had people watching to see if they had any problems, and they would go over and write in chalk on them. Say if some person had like a limp, they would write like L on them. It was okay. So everybody that was coming in had to have a landing inspection card. And at the bottom of the card, they had 14 areas where they had to be checked off on. And this person is checked off on 12. And you'll see in the next photo how they look wearing their inspection card. Here's a person, and he's going through the rounds. And each time he goes through a different round, they would check off what they found. And this was the most feared examination. They were being examined by what were known as the eye men, and they were being examined for trachoma, which is an infectious eye disease. And if you had that, you would be deported. That's why the shipping companies used to give the people medical examinations before they let them come here, because they didn't want to pay the cost of sending them back to Europe. As I said, these people were called the I-Men, and in total, 2% of the people who arrived at Ellis Island were deported or were sent back. And here's a person that was detained for a swollen cheek. You can see on the bottom here, for a swollen cheek. And she was examined, the defect was recorded, and she was on hold, and that was withdrawn, so she was okay. But they didn't know what, this was in 1899. She showed up with a swollen cheek, and they picked her out of the line, and they said she has to be checked out. Next, people would go to the registry hall, and they would have to answer questions having to do with their passenger list, like who were they going to, how much money they had, which presented people problems. And here's an example of the people being asked their questions. If you're familiar with genealogical research, you'll know that like the passenger list has like 29 different boxes where they fill in about like who you're going to, where were you before you were here, just a lot of information. And so here the people are being grilled about like that to see if anything doesn't sound right. Well, one of the things they said about Ellis Island is that people had their name changed. I've met some expert genealogists who say that that's not true, because the name that you came with on your passenger list, unless they couldn't read it, is what you left with. That was your name. And so people would wait online, and then they would get to speak to these people. But sometimes there were problems. There were problems that they had to ask other questions about. And it was said, or I've read, that each of the inspectors that did the incoming interviews spoke 5 different languages. And these people are being interviewed for further information about something, but they look very concerned. I had my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, he didn't have enough money. You had to have $25. So he was put in detention, and he was given. I found this at the municipal archives. I found wonderful things there. I found that he had um, a notification put next to his name, LP LPC, likely to be a public charge. And I had a relative that came here in 1891 as a laundry worker, and he later, after 6 years, 5 years, he became a citizen and got into Cornell Medical School, became a doctor. So this doctor, a Dr. Feldman, came and rescued my grandfather. I don't know what he told him or whatever, but he vouched for him being, he wouldn't have to be a public charge. They also instituted a literacy test in 1917. They gave it in Italian, whatever language that you spoke, you were tested for literacy, and that was an important thing that you were able to read. I don't know the statistics about people were deported or any other negative consequences, but that was a literacy test. They try to make things tighter. People were getting upset about all these new immigrants coming into the country. And here was basically the end of your Ellis Island experience. And these were known or became known as the stairs of separation. If everything went okay, you went this way and maybe you went to the left, you caught a train. They sent you back to New Jersey, you caught a train, and then you went someplace else. And if this went over here, if everything, and you wanted to stay in New York, you went down the one on the right side, and there would be a ferry to take you to New York. And if you went down the center stairs, that would be detention. So these were the stairs of separation. There were songs about people killing themselves. The Irish had the Isle of Tears song. And here were waiting for the new immigrants were the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. They were right on East Broadway. And if you notice, they're all wearing new shoes. These are the people that they wanted to become American. They wanted to look American, had American flags. There's a date up here, it says 1916. And they were very important for the new immigrants finding their families, that they didn't know where they were. Maybe they weren't even being expected. I don't know. But these two guys, there's two guys look like rabbis in here, but everybody else is wearing like very modern looking clothing and they have new shoes on. One of the things that they would do, which was a big problem, was that when a family, usually it would be a mother with the children showing up after the husband had been here for a few years, and the husband would take a look at the way the women looked who just came over, and they looked like greenhorns. They didn't want that because the husbands, they all look like that. They were becoming Americans. So what these he asked people, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, they would go out to Ellis Island and they would dress up the the mother and the children in American style looking clothing, so that the husbands wouldn't go crazy. Although that there was still a lot of family breakups, and because the husbands couldn't deal with their with their wives that were greenhorns. There was a movie made about this called Hester Street. I highly recommend it. It's about the early 1900s, family just going right through this type of thing. You get to see the Lower East Side. You get to see people working in sweatshops. Very good. It's called Hester Street. And here is the Triumphal Arch. It showed this was a positive view of immigration at the time. On the back, on the sun there, it says progress. And Uncle Sam was standing there, and all of the immigrants were just marching through and coming into America. It was a great day. That's the way it was perceived. But there were other ways of looking at it. Well, this way over here was that Uncle Sam, they viewed him as the modern Moses. Puck was a magazine at the time, a humorous magazine, and Uncle Sam seems to have like stereotypic Jewish figures on his face, his nose, whatever, and everybody else is coming through. They're well dressed, uh, and on the waves it says intolerance, and there's something else, and there's a skull in the clouds, but the people are being welcomed in. But here's the other way that they're thought of also. Uncle Sam looks at him and says, no good. And it says on the bag, it says poverty, it says vagrancy or something like that. But Uncle Sam is obviously not that happy about these new Jewish immigrants coming into the country. And one of the most interesting things, I guess everybody has heard of the expression "the melting pot." We're a big melting pot. That actually was a musical play written by Israel Zangwill, who escaped from the Kishinev pogrom in 1903 that I showed the headline from the Forward newspaper, and he said in his in the dialogue of the play that New York, America is a big crucible, and all the races of Europe are coming in to reconstitute and become new citizens. And he opened this show. This is the original program. He opened the show in 1908 in Washington, D.C., and Teddy Roosevelt was there, and they were sitting near each other. And it was reported that Teddy Roosevelt leaned over and said, "That's a very fine play, Mr. Zangwill." And then the show opened up in New York in 1909 and traveled around. But the cultural survival of this is the word melting pot. It perseveres, persists in our language when we talk about the United States being a melting pot, people coming here for better opportunities. And this is a postcard that showed how people lived in the Lower East Side. And there was an author, Arnold Bennett, and when it was taken on a tour, he was from England, he was taken on a tour of the Lower East Side. And he said that he looked at a scene like this. He says, every door and window was sweating humanity. And that's the way it was. Everybody just was crowded in, and it was noisy. That's what they said. It was very noisy. And so a report of the United Hebrew Charities says these people are dazzled by the brilliance of the city and believe there is room for everybody. So here's the next one is will show you how the brilliance of the city. And I've walked down these streets. There's no, wagons anymore. LaGuardia got rid of them in the 1930s, and but the buildings are still there. You can still get the same feeling. But this is not a brilliant way to live, and this is how people live. Just buying what their necessities out of these people that sold things off wagons. And this is the example of push carts shopping on Hester Street. I wonder if anybody watching will recognize an ancestor. Okay, and here is a religious store on Essex Street, and this is a word for tallis or talit, and this was brought to my attention by somebody that was watching this presentation somewhere else. And these stores don't exist on Essex Street anymore. They've all moved to Brooklyn. And here's a guy, he's selling his pretzels or bagels, and he's wearing his greenhorn shoes. And it's winter, it's cold, he's wearing this heavy coat. And people, they had to make a living, and that's what they did, anything they could. And here's another street scene on Delancey Street. And there's this young boy and he doesn't have any shoes on. It's obviously summer. These people wearing like very light or hardly anything. These workmen, construction people with diggers. And this is how life was on Delancey Street in 1908. And these people were selling old clothes. This was probably in Seward Park on East Broadway. They used to have a lot of people selling old clothes there, and or buying old clothes. And they would say, "I cash clothes." I don't know how to say that in Hebrew. I don't know how to say anything in Hebrew. The only Hebrew actually I could read is the word kosher, and only if it's on a salami. So I don't know too much about that. And here's a example of people working in a sweatshop, and this was known as the needle trades. The clothing industry was very good for the Jewish immigrants because a lot of them had these skills before they left, and they found work, although they had to work like 16 hours a day. And over here on the top is a marriage certificate, the ketubah over here. And what they would do with the women they would, a lot of the seamstresses were Italian. So they mixed them with the Jewish women so they couldn't talk to each other and just, keep them working. And this is the sweatshop poet, Morris Rosenfeld. He's still very famous. People read his work. And he came here in 1886 from Poland, and he described himself as a teardrop millionaire because that's how life was for him, being working in a sweatshop. And here's a pose picture by Louis Hine. Louis Hine was known as the muckraker photographer, and he has these children working. They're very well dressed, but this is a pose picture, and he was very responsible for the child labor laws that prevented children from being abused in these sweatshops. Louis Hine was his name. And these are people that are working in a factory, big sweatshop, I don't know. And they're well dressed. They're wearing ties, and the irons that they would have to, do their job with, they weighed around 20 pounds each. And they look like a good crew doing their job. And here's a tenement apartment. There are 7 people here. There are 5 children, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they may have even had boarders at night. People had to take in boarders. But this looks like a pose picture also. And behind the boy standing here is an oven or something that they cook with. I don't see any other kitchen type things there. And an important part of the entertainment for the Jewish population was the Jewish Rialto. This was the Yiddish theater, and they used to love to go there and see people uh, to give their performances. Molly Picon, she was the darling of the Yiddish theater, and I Googled the Feder sisters, and they were good performers too. You might want to do that. And these are the different performers that were there. Jacobson, Adler, and this was right. There were theaters right next to each other. Now, here is an example of theater posters, and Yiddle with his fiddle. You could watch that on YouTube. I recommend it. I highly recommend it. It was filmed in Poland in 1934. There are on the different YouTubes, they give you sections, where you could watch the first half, the second half. There's one that be able to play the whole thing. My favorite part is they're klezmer musicians, and they get hired to perform at a big Jewish wedding in a shtetl. And as I say, you can get this on YouTube, and I highly recommend it. It's called Yiddle with his fiddle. Enjoy it. Share it with a friend. And so then the things started getting more negative about all these new immigrants. And just as there were posters showing, like how welcome they were, there were songs. Now they're having another song called "Oh, Close the Gates," and that's what happened. And in 1924, they had the Johnson-Reed Act, and they cut off immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe. And any immigrants that were let in, uh, they used quotas from 3 to 2%, and using the 1890 census as the numerical basis. So they really stopped immigration. So that's why the Great Jewish Migration is considered from 1881 to 1924. So now we're back to my explorations. This is on 375 Broome Street. This is my favorite cultural survival. And you have Moses in here. You have like the Stars of David. And this picture was taken in December around Christmas. And a couple of floors down, there was like, you could see a Christmas tree. And the people, now if you wanted to live in that building, it'd cost you around $4,000 a month rent. I checked that out. And so this is in Little Italy. And it amazed me that I saw this. This architecturally is called the cornice. And we'll continue on with my explorations. These buildings with the stars built into them were built that way to attract Jewish tenants. And the architects and the builders were German Protestants. And they were the Herter brothers, Herter. And there were around 6 of these buildings around the Lower East Side. I tried to get to all of them that I could find. And here is, I was trying to get up to 256 Henry Street, where my relative that came here in 1891 lived, but that building was torn down. And on the way back, um, I passed the building on Monroe Street, and one of the doors was open, so I went inside, and I found this uh, just typically the way a building used to look. I looked up the date. The building was built in 1900, and you have like this this tile floor with this running pattern, and these were known as dumbbell apartments because there were 4 apartments on a floor, and they had 2 bathrooms for all 4 apartments, and a stairway, and you had a living room, a parlor, living room. So basically, people lived in this type of environment. One of the things I have to point out is that tuberculosis was very prominent at that time, and people would get tuberculosis by living and walking up the stairs, and they would inhale the bacteria from their infected neighbors coughing. And there was a big article in the New York Herald in 1903, and there was an area, they called it the lung block, and there was a article called "The Plague in Its Stronghold." So many people, this was on near East Broadway. You have Market Street, you have Cherry Street down here, and Cherry Street rather, and there was a lot of tuberculosis. In 1918, there were 50,000 cases of TB in Manhattan. There were 5,000 deaths because of TB. And it was very diabolical. It was like we suffered through COVID, or we still may be suffering through COVID, but they had TB and they couldn't do anything about it. So walking around, I found this is where Eddie Cantor used to live. On 19 Eldred Street, and I went into his apartment building. Now, there's a wonderful YouTube. It's called The Lady Dances with Eddie Cantor. I recommend that very, very much. And another YouTube that I would recommend with that is Cagney Speaks Yiddish. And it's about James Cagney watching somebody, a Yiddish speaking immigrant, asking an Irish cop how to find Ellis Island. And Cagney steps in because James Cagney, he was brought up on the Lower East Side and he learned how to speak Yiddish. So Cagney Speaks Yiddish and The Lady Dances. Eddie Cantor, The Lady Dances. Very good. Over here is the Bialystock Home for the Aged. It was built in 1929, and what it was a mutual aid society where there were 40,000 Bialystockers living in New York City, and they used this as a place to network, to get services from whatever they needed, get jobs, and these 12 circles around the doorway, those are, they stand for the 12 tribes of Israel. The Bialystocker is written in a sort of a Jewish style. But when I took this picture, it was not in operation. So I don't know what happened to it. Over here is another mutual aid society that was later turned into a Chinese funeral home. It's a cultural survival. You can still see where it says Kletzker Brotherly Aid Society. And this is a cultural survival. Over here is the East Side Mikveh. And the building was built in 1842 in an Art Deco style. And it was taken over by the Society for Family Purity in 1941 and converted into a mikveh or a ritualarium, as you'll see. And anybody can go there and take advantage of the services. Over here is the the headline for the what am I doing here? For the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, where 146 people died. The building is now part of the NYU structures along in the village, and it said the morgue is full of our victims. And that was the reason that this fire caused so much death was that the door for the sweatshop was locked from the outside, and the people couldn't get out, so they had to jump off or jump out of the roof, the windows of the floor that they were working on, the 19th floor or whatever. It was considered a horrible tragedy. And here is the Jewish Daily Forward. This was like the most prominent newspaper in New York City. It was founded in 1897, and Abraham Cahan, he was the editor, and he was a big advocate of assimilation, that people, become Americans. And he wrote a lot of things to inspire people to become Americans. This is how it was sold by young men called newsies, and they would had a circulation of around 250,000 a day, and it sold probably for like a penny. And they also had a column, the Gallery of Missing Husbands. Remember I said how abandonment of by fathers was very prevalent? They had like a column where women would send in photos of their husbands that disappeared, looking for them. And I think in Yiddish that's called aguna, when a woman is deserted by her husband. They also had another column called a Bintel Brief, a bundle of letters. It's sort of like a Jewish Dear Abby, and people can actually there's a book now published called the Bintel Brief, and you could read all the letters that were sent in to the forward, not all of them, but you'll read about people's problems that they had, like in the sweatshops or with missing husbands or whatever. You know, it was the Dear Abby, and the forward would give answers in the issues of the newspaper. Across the street from the from the forward was Strauss Square, or used to be called Rutgers Square. The whole area was called the Yiddish Newspaper Row. There were like 6 newspapers. And this is where they used to have all the demonstrations of when people were on strike. And for example, the International Lady Garment Worker Union strike in 1909, or they called this the Revolt of the 20,000. They had thousands of people in this area here, and they would demonstrate. And anytime that there was a labor thing, there was always go to the Rutgers Square, Strauss Square. Now, this is an interesting building. This is 26 Canal Street. This is where my maternal grandfather was living when my grandmother and her 3 daughters and son showed up in 1922. He died later, like 3 months later, of TB. But I went into this building, and one of the handouts describes, shows that building. This is my grandfather. I never knew him. This is my grandmother, Mirka. This is my Uncle Morris, my Aunt Dottie, my Aunt Frida, and this is my mother. She's around 18 years old there. And up in Harlem, my father's family lived at 103rd and Lexington Avenue, and that building was built in 1910. So I went up to Harlem and I found out there were a lot of Italians living up there in that building. I checked the census, and that's who their neighbors were. My grandfather, Hyman Chaplin, he was the person that I originally researched in the municipal archives. Um, he opened up a hardware store because Harlem was going through a building boom. He started out as a grinder, and he got into the hardware business, which became the business that his 2 sons went into, my father and his brother Ben. Now, this is my proudest document that I got from the municipal archives. This is the Ellis Island Certificate of Arrival. This was used in my grandfather's naturalization process. It shows he arrived in July 12th, 1908. Like in room 703, you can go up. There's a card catalog. You could look up a name. And I mean, you know, if you have a name that there's not like 40 of them, but you could look up a name and it tells you what shelf to look on, what volume, and you could take out all the original naturalization papers, which is amazing. That's how I started my genealogy quest, with the original papers that I got at the municipal archives. I was at, when I first got there, I used to go by the microfilm cabinet, and people would be lined up, you know, waiting to get whatever microfilm they wanted. And I would ask them what they were looking for, and they would tell me, you know, their different research projects. And one day, a woman who was there, you know, she was like a volunteer, and she said, "Well, what are you looking for?" I go, "I don't know. I'm new at this, and I'd like to know about how my family, uh, you know, did in New York and what happened to them and the original name." She goes, "You belong in room 703." That's where I went. That's an amazing room. And the people up there were really good to me. You know, they treated me well. It's right opposite City Hall Park at 31 Chambers Street. I recommend you take a visit there. And on the first floor, they have like all the vital statistics of where you could find all the birth, death, all those type of things, marriage, and save that after you go up to room 703 and look up who you're looking for in the card catalog and take down the original uh, um, paperwork that was done. Because you could put your finger right over their signature, whoever it was. And what I found too with these these naturalization papers, they have witnesses. Those witnesses turned out to be relatives and they had addresses. I later, that's how I learned how to, network all these things in together. That all these names, all these people that are on your ancestors' papers, they're probably relatives. And it was a wonderful experience. I worked 5 minutes from there. I used to give tours to the people I work with, to show them what I was doing during lunch. I was at the state health department. Um, yeah, so this is the Ellis Island arrival certificate. Wonderful. And here, those two buildings where my mother and my father lived, they got together and they got married in 1932. Jack Chaplin, Gertrude Groger, and I took this picture on the computer that they had on the first floor. They have the original marriage certificates or copies of them. What I did also is I went over to Worth Street with the health department and I got a copy of the original filled out marriage certificate, formal one. And I had to go to the marriage bureau. And what was really interesting about that was like all these women dressed like brides that were walking around. And I guess they were getting married there too, or going right to where they were going to get married. And what also was important to the Jews that came in the Great Jewish Migration were these settlement houses. This one was the Educational Alliance. It was started in 1889, and it was started by the German Jews because they were embarrassed by all these people coming over. So they wanted to have them Americanized as fast as possible. And so this was like an example of an English class at night. And you can go in there. You can see the old pictures of how it used to be. That's on East Broadway. There's another one, the Henry Street Settlement. It was started by a social worker named Lillian Wald, and she became a very important person in terms of like assimilation for people and providing services. These places are still in existence, but they're serving different populations. They're cultural survivals. And here is the Eldridge Street Synagogue. It was built in 1886, and it was built by the Herder brothers again, the ones that built the Jewish stars then. It was renovated in 2007. And here's an example there was a magazine, the Century magazine in 1892. They took a picture, and you can see they're wearing these large, I don't know if that's for real. I don't know if people really in their services wore these like Abraham Lincoln type of top hats, but that's how they showed it in the Century magazine in 1892. This is an example of a still functioning synagogue. There are around 7 that are still functioning. And this is a replica of a synagogue in Greece. These are Sephardic people uh, that worship there. And they live in, the original is in Janina in Greece. Another one that's still in existence is the Bialystaka Synagogue. It was purchased in 1905. It was originally a church that was built in 1826, went through some changes, but the Bialystockers got it in 1905 and they turned it into their synagogue. And this is the oldest building that there's a synagogue in, and still existing in New York City. Here is the House of Sages. This was built for retired rabbis, and this is also on East Broadway. East Broadway is a very interesting place. One after the other, there's different things that you can see. the people that first came here from Russia, they like to think of it as like a place where you would go to see fine things. And they called it Nevsky Prospect, which is like the same type of place where like in St. Petersburg, where you would go to see like fine buildings and whatever. It's also the place where East Broadway, where doctors had their offices. Here's Congregation Hassan Sofer, and this synagogue is the oldest in operation synagogue in New York City. It was built in 1853. This is a cultural survival. And this is Stiebel Row. It's on East Broadway between Clinton and Montgomery Streets, and has all these little places in them. Stiebel means small little room in Yiddish, and for example, you have Beth Hasidim de Poland, or the Pious Men of Poland, and next to it is a charity organization, one after the other. There are these different little cultural survivals of synagogues, of study groups, or different types of places. Now, this place was a very interesting place for me to find. This is a yeshiva, and it was built in 1907. And I was outside over here, next to the yeshiva, over here, part of the yeshiva, is one of those buildings with stars in it. And I was looking at the star building, and this guy came out. His name is Yehuda. And I asked him about the stars, and he's the one that told me that it was put there to have the Jews move in to become tenants. And then he was closing the place up. The shamus is the person that takes care of the synagogue, but he brought me inside to show me around. And also, he wanted me to perform like a Yortzeit ceremony. That's a ceremony for the dead where you recite certain things. People light candles, whatever. And he became a good source of information. Every day he used to walk in from Brooklyn over the Williamsburg Bridge, which became, in 1903, when it was built, it was called the Jews Highway. So I've been back to see him like 3 or 4 times. He's a nice guy. And here is the Darchei Noam building, or the East Side Hebrew Institute. It was founded originally as as a lodging house for boys, but in 1925 they wanted to Americanize people. They wanted to have them become, just deal with daily life as a New Yorker, not think of themselves like living back somewhere else. So this has become co-ops. And here is the Rabbi Jacob Joseph Yeshiva. Rabbi Jacob Joseph was brought to New York to be the head rabbi in 1888. That didn't work out too well, and this is being converted into co-ops too. I should mention before that the Jewish Daily Forward is also co-ops that I mentioned. And here's another synagogue that has been repurposed, but they've kept a Jewish star, but they put a cross over it. It was originally a church in 1890. Then it became a synagogue somewhere along the way. Then it became a church again. And it's a very big place, goes all the way down the block. It was called the Forsyth Street Shul, no longer working as a synagogue. And here's another one, a synagogue that no longer a synagogue. It's become a Buddhist temple, and it's also become a 99-cent store. At least when I took the picture, maybe the price has gone up. It was built in 1853. It became a synagogue in 1903, and it was a very well-to-do congregation that went there. Here's an example of a synagogue that was purchased and now used as somebody's home. This is on Rivington Street. Across the street is it's an empty lot, but it's an old Romanian synagogue that they used to call it the Cantors Carnegie Hall, because the cantors that sang there were so eloquent and so good with their voices that they compared it to Carnegie Hall. Examples of businesses, for example, are Mendel Goldberg Fabrics. That's on 72 Hester Street. That's been there since 1890, and the family still owns it. And they have a very good business that goes around the world. They ship out different types of fabrics. And this is on Orchard Street. Max Feinberg used to sell children's clothing there, and that was built in 1926. My first experience with Orchard Street was like when I was 8 years old. My parents took me to a place called Cheap Pesci's to buy clothes for, they were sending me away to summer camp. And Cheap Pesci's, he's known. I mean, other people that I've given this talk to, they talk about, yeah, they know about Cheap Pesci. And it was a place to go to get a deal. And here, this is a sort of a tragedy. This is the Jewish mural. It used to be back on the rear of the Bialystok Home for the Aged. And one day they just painted over it in 2016. It was created in 1973. And what it does, it shows, it's always been called a Jewish mural. It shows the people on the boats coming here, shows the International Lady Garment Worker Union, shows a woman lighting candles. It shows people that are marching to Israel, to Russia, whatever, or leaving Russia. But it was just painted over. I walked by one day and it's gone. Amazing. And here is where people go to have lectures about what I'm talking about and being shown the sites. This is called Memory Culture. And this is the Tenement Museum. I always go, when I'm down there, I pass through their bookstore to see what's going on. So now, I guess we've reached the point where we're tired, maybe we're hungry, we'll get something to eat. For example, here's Jonas Schimmel's Knish Bakery. And he started out with a push cart, and now his Knish place has been there since 1910, and he does a very good business. And it's a very interesting place to go inside because he has all around on the walls these old articles about the Lower East Side and the inhabitants. And the people who work there look like the original people who worked there back then. Here's Russ and Daughters, their appetizing store. Many people still go there. It's a very popular place on East Houston. And here's Katz's Delicatessen. When I went there the first time, I had a pastrami sandwich for like 80 cents. And now it's like around $27 to get a pastrami sandwich. And it's all tourists that are lined up around the place. Okay, so I'd like to give you, I have a few more slides. I didn't know where to put them, but I first want to give you a reference. There's a woman, her name is Pamela Nadell. She wrote her PhD thesis called The Journey to America by Steam, the Jews of Eastern Europe in Transition. And I was going to say, if you still want to access it, email me, uthmc@aol.com, and I'll send it to you. Now, because it used to be free, then they charged $30 for it, and then they made it more difficult to get. I tried it this morning. I Googled Pamela Nadell thesis, and you could just download it on your computer. So one way or the other, if you want to get it from me, just uthmc@aol.com, and I'll ship it out to you in the next day or so. Or you want to get it yourself, Pamela Nadell thesis. It's a wonderful piece of information. Has a lot of references. And Pamela Nadell, she was a professor of Jewish studies at American University, or she still may be, I don't know. But if you're interested in Jewish genealogy, you really should have this document. And here, for a Hanukkah gift, this is a YouTube It's called Jewish Wedding, An Unexpected Surprise. I recommend that you do that too, and you'll have like a good time, I believe. So now this is what I call intermission. Now I'm going to finish up with the last few slides that I have. This is the Shearith Israel Cemetery from that Mill Street Synagogue. The cemetery was started in 1682. It's at St. James Place. It's right below Chinatown. Very easy to get to. There are 18 Revolutionary War soldiers buried here. I don't know if they were Jewish or not, but it says the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue, and there's a fence. You can't get in. Or maybe, I don't know, they have certain days when you can, but you can't get in generally. And here's how it looks. And in 1911, somebody did a drawing of it, and it looks the same. Like so. And this is the last slide. I didn't know where to put it, but I thought it would be important for you to see. This is Sid Klein's Fat Man's Shop. And he advertised that like no matter what size underwear you need, you can get it. And this photo was taken in 1955. He's no longer there, but the photo is a cultural survival. So I thank everybody for their time and for attending. And if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them if I can.
I think we have a few questions in the chat that we might be able to go back to.
How do I do that?
I'll read them to you.
Go ahead.
Okay, so Bob said hello from Ontario, Canada.
That's
And
good.
then Marlene wrote that her my Hantman family was also from Smilovici.
Yeah,
My great grandfather emigrated with his son in 1895. His wife and the rest of the children came to New York City in 1897. So let's see what else we have. Oh, somebody commented that they loved their hair, and the picture that was referred to, and I thought the same thing, was of the women that were sewing in a sweatshop, and they had beautiful hair buns, for
right.
lack of a better term. Carol says she graduated from Seward Park High School in 1963. Randy said that Lewis Hines exposed working conditions of children.
That's correct.
And Barbara said that on Restaurant Row on West 47th, there's some buildings with Jewish stars around the windows, and she thinks Barbetta's is one of them.
I know, I've seen that. Yeah.
Okay. And then somebody was wondering about room 703, if it's at 39 Chambers Street.
31 Chambers Street.
Okay. And Gail wanted to know if the municipal archives will be digitized. And
Um,
Marlene thought that they'd been moved to Brooklyn.
I was there a couple of months ago, so like it's still there. I don't think they're moving it. I don't know what, it goes back to colonial times. So it could be moving certain things and keeping other things. I don't know what exactly is happening there, but if go to room 703. And before you go, look it up on the computer, make sure I'm giving you the right address. To me, it's 31 Chambers Street, right across the street from City Hall Park.
And somebody else put a link to the municipal archives.
Good.
And Carol said she was a CIT counselor at the Edgies, the Educational Alliance day camp, which took a Staten Island ferry to a park every day in 1962.
I'm glad people are having these memories and it's contributing. It's really nice. It's really nice.
Francis says this was a sensational top shelf presentation.
Thank you.
Shani wants to know how you got the name Chaplin. Is it Kaplan?
No, it's Hapun, Chapun, Hapun. That my grandfather came here in 1908 with Hapun, and by 1915, on the New York State Census, it's Chaplin.
Interesting. Marlene says the records from the archives are being digitized currently. Could you repeat your email address? Someone wanted to know.
uthmc@aol.com.
Oh, the Gibson girl hairstyles. That was the the
The
hairstyles we saw in
the
that
Gibson,
picture.
the Gibson girl, that's what they call them.
Yep.
And also, I have another presentation on doing research at the Municipal Archive. So if in the future you ever want to see that, that's very good too, because you'll see all the old little rooms, and it's an amazing situation. So I have that to offer.
Shani wants to know what your name means.
I don't know. I don't know.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions? If you'd like, you could unmute yourself. All right. Okay,
I've
well,
I've never given a Zoom presentation before. I'm used to standing up in front of people, and I feel a little bit like David Bowie in his Space Oddity. I'm alone in my space capsule, whatever, singing his song. But I'm glad that it inspired interest, and that you folks had like your contributions to make. All the best to everybody. All the best.
okay.